Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of the Free Full Stack course. In this chapter, we're going to install Python, Pip, and IPython using PyEnv. If you followed the chapters in this course chronologically, you should now have PyEnv installed, independent of your operating system, whether it's a Linux-based operating system or if you have Windows or Mac OS, because we've already done the installation of all these three operating systems. This chapter is part of the Free Full Stack course. However, you can also follow along with this chapter if you're just here to install Python, IPython, or Pip using PyEnv on your destination operating system. If you're interested in the Free Full Stack course, the link to the entire courses playlist is at the bottom of the screen as part of the description of this chapter. Now, if you've installed PyEnv on your computer already by following along with the chapters chronologically, then you should actually rejoice that the installation of Python, Pip, and IPython is going to be very, very easy with PyEnv, because PyEnv's commands work exactly the same on Linux as they do on Mac, and they do on Windows as well. So you don't really have to worry about moving between operating systems if you're used to PyEnv. So what we're going to do in this chapter is I'm going to explain the instructions on Mac OS, but the same instructions apply to both Linux and Windows. When it comes to PyEnv, we have three very important versionings that we have to keep in mind. Basically, the way that we manage Python versions is from the terminal, or the shell as some call it as well. So PyEnv has the ability to set a specific Python version for your entire shell session. So that is a PyEnv version for your shell. There's also versioning for a local Python version using PyEnv. And then we also have a global version. So let's start with the global version. When you set a Python version globally with PyEnv, then your entire system is going to use that version whenever there are no more specific versions specified by either the local version or the shell version. So let's just imagine a world where you haven't set any versions for Python in your operating system using PyEnv, and you start with a global version of 3.0. Then when you start a new shell, PyEnv is going to look at the version set in the system. It's going to first start with the shell version. There are no shell versions set. Then it's going to go to the local version. And there are no local versions set either. So it's going to look at the global version and say, okay, 3.0 is the global version that I'm going to use in this shell session. Then you go ahead and become a little bit more comfortable with PyEnv and set a local version in a specific directory on your computer, for instance, where we're going to create our backend. Then you set the local version in that directory to 3.1, for instance. The next time you start your shell, then let's say that the shell starts, or your terminal starts, in your home directory and not in the directory that you set another Python version of 3.1. PyEnv is going to look at exactly the same process again. It's going to first say, do I have a shell version set? No, we don't. Do I have a local version set? No, we don't, because right now we're in the home directory and not in the directory that we set the local version previously. Then it's going to default to the global version, which is 3.0. As soon as then you issue a cd command, for instance, in your terminal to navigate to the folder that you'd previously set a Python version using PyEnv locally, PyEnv is going to understand that here is a specific version set for this particular directory. Then it's going to switch to that version for you, which is 3.1. And then if you then go ahead and become even more comfortable with PyEnv, and then you start setting shell versions, the next time you start your shell, let's say that you close your terminal and you start a new shell session, then PyEnv is going to first look at, oh, do I have a shell version set? Let's say that you set it to 3.2 previously. Then it's going to use the 3.2 version, and it's not going to go to the global version, which was previously set to 3.0. So I just want to tell you about the structure of how PyEnv actually uses Python versions, which is global, shell, and then, global, local, and then you have shell. Okay, so that's very important to grasp. And also you could argue that local and shell could be fighting sometimes with each other. But as you start doing more and more work with PyEnv, you'll understand how it actually works. So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so let's go to the next instruction, which is actually installing Python with PyEnv. So I'm going to do some screen reshuffling in here. Let's see if I can get this right. So here we have a terminal window open. And as if you followed along with the chapters in this course chronologically, you'll know that I really prefer to use iterm2 and also all my ZSH as my shell. And there are instructions in this playlist, which as you can see at the bottom of the screen, the link to. If you go in there, then you'll also see the chapter that relates to creating an environment like mine, actually installing iterm2, etc. So I really recommend that you actually have the same setup as I do, which makes the whole process easier for both of us. So as you can see at the bottom of the screen, you can install a specific version of Python using PyEnv install. And if you want to see all the available Python versions for your operating system, you have to type PyEnv install and then -- list. And you can see in here, there are so many different forks of Python and different versions of Python that you can install. So we have Miniconda, for instance, and then we have Anaconda. And then also we have just vanilla versions of Python. And usually I go with the vanilla versions of Python, but some of you may actually, for instance, prefer to use Anaconda, which comes with some specific packages that you prefer. So I can see in here, for instance, the latest version that is actually available for my operating system is 3.10.4. And then you actually can install this version using the same command, pyenv install and then 3.10.4, or you can say 3.10.1. So let's go ahead in here and say that we want to install 3.10.4. And again, depending on your operating system, this version could be different. So let's say that the version that might be available for all operating systems could be 3.10.0. Maybe on Ubuntu, the latest version is 3.10.1. Maybe on a specific Mac OS version, the latest version available is 3.10.2. But we could be certain that at this point, 3.10.0 should be a version that is available for all operating systems, or the three operating systems that we're targeting in this course, the Linux, Windows, and Mac OS. So let's go ahead and try to install 3.10.0. So I'm going to clear the screen, and let's say pyenv install 3.10.0. Okay. And this process is just going to go ahead and it's going to do the installation, and this could take some time. So let it do its thing, and then we'll continue with the video after that. Okay, that was fantastic. This process took perhaps about a minute or two on my computer. It could differ though on your operating system and dependent on your hardware, for instance. So I can see in here that I got a message. Perhaps you can't actually see it. I'll bring it up here so it's not obstructed by any labels on the screen. I can see that PyEnv is saying install Python 3.10.02, and then it's telling me where it has installed that version. So you may sometimes actually be curious about which versions of PyEnv you have installed on your computer using PyEnv, actually. So if you say PyEnv and then you say versions, then you should see various versions that are installed on your computer and at which level they are, for instance. And when I say level, I really mean that different places inside your computer and different directories, different programs can have specific versions of Python locked for that particular program, for instance, or for that particular folder. So it's very important then to be able to use Python to be able to use PyEnv in order to see the versions available also, and also the versions that are being used by different levels and things inside your computer. So if you want to see the available versions, at least, you can always use PyEnv versions. And I can see in here 3.10.0 is available. However, right now 3.10.2 is being used. So if you want to then be able to use a specific version of Python, we're going to see that actually soon in a minute, but then you should be able to use one of the commands provided here. So if you say pyenv, if I change the size a little bit because the formatting gets a little bit messed up, I believe, if the font is too big. There are three important commands for PyEnv here for managing the versions. One is global. Okay, we talked about global already. Then we have local, and also we have shell. So these three commands we're going to be using then throughout this course in order to manage various versions of Python for our backend, for instance. Okay. So before we talk about that, you may also get a message during the installation of Python that pip, which is a package installer for Python, is out of date. And then the way to upgrade pip, I mean, if I type pip in here, okay, you can see the commands for pip. And if I say which pip, I can see that is actually inside PyEnv at the moment. Okay. If I say pip version, I can see the version for pip as well. However, if during the installation of Python, you got a message saying that pip is out of date, in order to update pip, you can actually say Python. Let's see which Python. It's Python. Module pip. So this M is for module pip. And then you say install. And then you say upgrade pip. Okay. So if you do that, then pip is actually basically you're upgrading pip using Python and pip itself. Okay. So that's also something that you could do in order to make sure that you have the latest version of pip. Now, let's talk a little bit about versions of Python and actually using specific versions of Python for your shell, for instance. So we're inside a shell right now. If I say Python version, I can see that 3.10.2 is being used currently. And then if I say which Python, I can actually see that the current version, which is 3.10.2, is being managed by PyEnv. Now, we also installed Python 3.10.0, which is perhaps the version that we're going to use for our entire backend throughout this course, unless we are going to change it later. So if I say PyEnv versions, you can see that 3.10.0 is a version that we've successfully installed on this computer. So how can we use that version? There are three ways of doing that. You either set it locally, or you set it as your shell version, or you set it globally. Okay, so if in here I say PyEnv, and I say for my current shell, I want to use 3.10.0, if I say Python version, I can now see 3.10.0 is being used for my shell. And I can actually close this iTerm window, and I can create a new one. I'll bring it up. Okay. Let's change the font size a little bit. And if I say PyEnv, and if I say Python version, you can see now it is being reset to 3.10.2. And that's because when I said that I want a specific version of Python for my current shell, I meant really for my current shell. It doesn't mean that every time that I create a new shell window or a new terminal with a new shell, that version is going to be used. So the PyEnv, so basically using PyEnv shell, you're setting only the current shell or the current terminal windows. Actually, we can't call it really windows because, for instance, in iTerm, you can create a whole new shell inside the same window. And this shell at the bottom will have its own independent version from this shell because they're two completely different shells. So we can't even call it window. We just should really call it a shell. And later in this course, we'll have a look at how we can set local, shell, and global versions and where they're actually useful. So for now, all you really need to know that we have a Python version of 3.10.0 installed, hopefully both actually on all three platforms. So Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. And if you don't have 3.10.0 available on that operating system, please do let me know in the comments at the bottom of the screen. So perhaps we can design this course using a version that is commonly available on all three platforms. But last I checked, 3.10.0 was available on Ubuntu, Windows 11, and the latest version of Mac OS. So we're pretty much done with the installation of Python and pip using PyEnv on our target operating system. With all that said, we can now go to installing IPython. In the previous chapters in this course, I've already talked a little bit about what IPython is and why it is useful. And in this chapter, we're going to go ahead and actually install IPython using pip. So now that you've installed Python and pip on your computer using PyEnv, we should be able to use pip to install IPython, which is an interactive Python shell, which is a REPL. So if you're already, for instance, familiar with some other REPLs, for instance, the Swift REPL, you should know what that is. But all you need to know is that IPython allows you to write Python code in the terminal interactively. So it has auto-completion for you, it has syntax highlighting, and a lot more. So let's just go ahead and follow the instructions at the bottom of the screen in order to install IPython. So I'm just going to say pip, and then we're going to say install IPython. And I already have IPython installed, but that was perhaps using another Python version. So you can't see it, but this command actually succeeded. So I can now see that IPython is installed. So, I mean, it doesn't really say that IPython was installed, but in my mind, if I don't see any errors, I know that the command succeeded. So if then in here we say which IPython, you should see that IPython is actually now an available command inside PyEnv as a shim. We've talked briefly about shims before when I introduced PyEnv in one of the previous chapters, but shims are PyEnv's shortcuts to various Python executables. So in this case, PyEnv is taking control of what IPython actually means to the current session in the terminal. So whether it's a local Python version set or a global or a shell version set, the shim for IPython is then going to delegate the execution of IPython to the correct IPython version for that terminal, for instance, or for that folder if we have a local Python version set. So we now have IPython installed, so we should just be able to write IPython and go into the IPython REPL. And then we should be able to use various functions in here, for instance, print, etc. And then we should be able to say exit to exit the IPython REPL. So if you've done this, then you have IPython, Python, and pip installed on your computer. And we're going to use this video as basically the base for many upcoming chapters. So though it's a short video, but it's very important because it basically lays the ground for installing the correct version of Python for the rest of this course. So again, I'm assuming that 3.10.0 is a version that's available on all Linux distributions, or all modern and updated Linux distributions, Windows, and also Mac OS. If it is not, if you're having trouble installing a 3.10.0 version of Python on your destination operating system, please do let me know which operating system you have, which version it is, and which version of Python is the latest version available. Maybe not even the latest, because on my Mac operating system, I had 3.10.4 available, but we didn't actually install that because I know on another Mac operating system that I have at home, since that is not the latest, then 3.10.4 wasn't available. It was actually 3.10.2. And I believe 3.10.4 is available mainly for Apple chips. So if you have an Intel Mac, for instance, then you may not even see 3.10.4 as an available version to install as a Python version. With all that said, really the point in here is to install 3.10.0 on your destination operating system. If you couldn't do that, please do let me know in the comments at the bottom of the screen. I really hope that you enjoyed this chapter. And if you have any questions, as always, just let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to answer you as fast as possible. So that was that for this chapter, and I'll see you in the next one.